Welcome to the Southern Voice. Here's your host, the Southern Voice himself, Jim Harris.
Welcome to the show and part 2 of our interview with Artimus Pyle. We're going to pick up where we left off discussing the album Street Survivors.
There's even a song in there with Rickey Medlocke. He's singing from the old Muscle Shows, and I thought that was good. Give the people what they want. Give them some juice. Give them a great album plus a little bonus. And Rickey is an amazing musician, man. He started off as drums with the band, but he was born with one lung, from what I understood, and playing an entire set and then ending with Freebird was just something physical, hard to do. I know it is. You know, I do it all the time for Rickey. And the fact is, man, the guy sings like a banshee and plays guitar. I wish I could play guitar like he does. Ronnie was basically like, Lynyrd Skynyrd's got a lead singer. It's me. So Rickey went out and started another great band, Blackfoot.
Which was an incredible band. Love it.
Incredible. You know, I love all those guys. When I went down for Gary Rossington's funeral, my two guitar players, Jerry Lyda and Scott Rains, who are the backbone of APB, we drove down there together and we stayed at Greg T. Walker's Native American land. We stayed on the basically real Native American land that he lives on. Greg T. Walker, the bass player for Blackfoot.
Right.
He is 100% Native American. We had some shots of really special whiskey that Greg had out in the middle of this thousands of acres that belong to the Native Americans there. He lives on it and farms it. And he has a big rehearsal place with all the Blackfoot memorabilia on the walls. And we had a ball. And he fixed us food. We drank some shots of whiskey for Gary Rossington, you know, and then the next day we drove on in. I bought a brand new black suit and a brand new cowboy hat. And I bought 3 handkerchiefs, brand new cotton handkerchiefs. And I gave one each to Gary's daughters and one to Judy Van Zandt because I knew that they were all brokenhearted, that they would need that brand new clean cotton handkerchief. That's what I went for, was for Gary's children, to show face for Gary's children. And Dale, Gary's wife, stood up when I stood in line to see her. And when I came up, she stood up and she said, Artimus, you look so good. Because I know how to wear a uniform. And I got a brand new black suit and a beautiful white shirt and an appropriate tie. I look good. I know how to wear a Marine Corps uniform, and putting on a suit is no different. You got to have everything tucked and rolled. So I represented for Gary, and we stayed with Greg T. Walker and talked about Skynyrd and Blackfoot and the old days. And Greg T. had all of us laughing our butts off, you know. Because, I mean, Greg T. played for Skynyrd, man. He played for Skynyrd in the very first days of the band. Greg T. Walker was the bass player, so he wrote with Ronnie.
That all kind of leads into the next thing I'm going to bring up, and that is the sense of family inside the music industry, and even more so inside the Southern rock segment of the music industry. A few episodes back, had a friend of yours as a guest on our show, Derek St. Holmes. The 77 tour, where basically some of the time Rex with our friend Lou Van Dora, but Ted Nugent was supporting Skynyrd on the 77 tour. And he was just talking about how close he became to you and how of all of the folks in Skynyrd, he felt like he was most connected to you.
I feel the same way about Derek, man. He's a great guy and an amazing guitar player. Ted was opening up for us. We were doing stadiums. We were doing big arenas and everything. And Ted and I would share a seat on the commercial jet airliners and show each other pictures of our four-wheel drive. He was into Broncos. He had about 3 Broncos, and one of them he called the Destructo buggy. And then I had about 4 Jeeps, and we would swap pictures of our Jeeps. I'd show him pictures of my kids, and we were good buds. And speaking of buds, Ted never smoked pot, but the rest of the band did. We were in Chicago, and I walked in their dressing room, and I lit up a giant, delicious doobie, and they all freaked out and said, no, stop. Ted will smell it. Help. And I swear, I saw and could smell the fear in the air from these guys. Because if Ted smelled that weed, man, I guess he'd lay low on the band, But I said, well, hell, man, there's enough for him too. And they're like, no, you don't understand. He doesn't smoke pot. I was like, oh, well, that's his problem.
By the way, if
But,
you haven't seen Derek live recently, he hasn't lost anything. His guitar playing is still exemplary. I mean, he's a great showman.
I know he is. We haven't crossed paths in a couple of years. We used to do a thing up north together called the Backyard Barbecue. Savoy Brown, all the remaining members of all these great 70s, 60s bands. If you don't mind, please tell Derek that I send my love and can't wait to cross paths again at some point.
Consider it done. To hit on another very sad chapter, and this has been covered so many times from so many different angles by so many people. The only thing that I want to ask you about the October 20th crash is, after all of the coverage and all the stories and all of the people that have had a version of things, being there, being a survivor, having firsthand knowledge of everything, is there anything that you want to say, look, this is a fact that everybody needs to know and we just need to quit discussing it? This is it.
Well, if 10 people see a car wreck, you're going to get 10 different stories.
Sure.
That's widely known. Ask any cop. If somebody witnesses a shooting, there's 20 people there, there's 20 different stories. Usually. I mean, that's not set in stone, but you get varying accounts of what happened. And at this point, Jim, I have to say that all the different accounts that are out there, it's how they saw it. It's how they felt it. And I'm not going to say that everybody is wrong. I'm not going to say everybody is right. I just know that I've had 3 airplane crashes. I'm a pilot. I don't have a current ticket, but I can fly anything on this planet. And I feel like I had a right to tell the story. And I've never been knocked unconscious in any of my car wrecks, truck wrecks, motorcycle wrecks, airplane crashes. And I've had 3 air crashes. I remember I never was knocked unconscious. I wanted to be conscious. I didn't let myself go under because I wanted to know what the hell was happening, because my Marine Corps training kicked in at my last airplane crash, which is the Skynyrd airplane crash. That Marine Corps training, I give a lot of thanks to, because I was able to put one foot in front of the other and not let snakes or deep black water or barbed wire or freshly plowed fields or getting shot stop me from taking them back to where that crash was. And I did all that. I did take all of the rescuers back to where I came out of the swamp and rolled over the barbed wire. The last thing I saw was hundreds of people going in, and I knew they'd be on top of my friends within minutes. Within a couple of minutes, they'd be starting to see wreckage, and they'd start seeing and hearing. And I wanted to go with them, but the cops wouldn't let me. They said, Mr. Pyle, you're injured. And I was. But I was kind of fighting with a couple of just regular dudes that were saying, you need to go to the hospital. And then a couple of cops got a hold of me. I could tell they were going to walk me to a vehicle to take me to a hospital. I said, are you sure you know where they are? I explained it very easily. I said, we're at home plate. And if you throw a baseball to center field, you'll be right on top of the plane. I'll never forget it. A couple of the rescuers looked at me like, what? We were in Mississippi. And they were like, huh? And I said, no. If we're standing on home plate and I throw a baseball and hit the center field backstop, you'll be on top of the plane. And with that, people just started going in that direction. And they took me away. So I did what I wanted to do because I thought I was dying. I thought I was going to croak, and I didn't want to die and not be able to give the information to the rescuers. So after doing all that, turns out I didn't die.
And we're all thankful for that. You know, in the song American Pie, they refer to the crash that killed Buddy Holly and others as the day the music died, and not to try to find a flair for the dramatic, but just because it's true. for a lot of us, it were just true Southern rock was in our DNA, and we could not have been fans to any greater extent of Lynyrd Skynyrd than we were. That was somewhat our day the music died.
You're absolutely
it continued. Right. Rock and roll continued after the Buddy Holly plane crash, but I think everybody would agree it was never quite the same.
I went to Clear Lake, Iowa. I played a show at the Surf Ballroom, and I sat in the phone booth that Richie Valens called his brother from and said, meet me in Chicago. I went there. I absorbed it. We went by the cornfield where the plane went down, where Buddy Holly and Richie Valens and the Big Bopper, we went to that cornfield. I relate to that. And you're right. That was the day that the Southern rock music coming from Ronnie Van Zant died. Because think about it, he was just getting started, man. All these songs that he wrote, that everybody knows the words to them. I play them every night. And the crowd knows and loves every one of the songs and sings along with us, almost sometimes louder than the band. And it's a phenomenon. We just played at the Rochester Jazz Festival, a huge outdoor venue. I thought the Rolling Stones were going to come on after us. It was such a huge stage. Production was amazing. We drew APB on a Friday night. We drew on our own 10,000 people.
Wow. I
almost cried. This was like a month ago. I got off our tour bus. I walked out to the stage. I thought there'd be a couple thousand people, but there was 10,000 people that showed up. I told the promoter, I said, we're not jazz. We're Southern rock. And he said, I know, man, but obviously they like you. We want you back next year. So that felt good to go on stage knowing that we get to do it again.
That just proves the staying power that the music that you guys created. Lynyrd Skynyrd and the Allman Brothers and Marshall Tucker and the Outlaws, all of those great bands, Molly Hatchet, that music, people still love it today.
We play with all those bands. We play with every one of those bands, the remainder of those bands, and always Ronnie's music rules the day. Always his music gets the biggest response. But you got to understand that that music is that strong. And so is Marshall Tucker and the Southern rock stuff. I don't consider the Allman Brothers Southern rock. They're Southern everything. They're Southern jazz. They're Southern rock. They're Southern country. What they did, they covered all the bases. So to me, the Allman Brothers are in a class all their own. But as far as like Marshall Tucker, Molly Hatchet, Charlie Daniels Band, Blackfoot, all of the Southern rock bands that are out there, all of them, every single one of them stands in line behind Ronnie Van Zant. And I don't think many people will argue with that because Ronnie's songs, but here's the kicker. Here's the kicker. What we did lose that day was any more songs from Ronnie. Any more songs from Ronnie and Steve together because they turned out to be a writing team, man. Ronnie and Steve were amazing together. Ronnie loved and respected Steve. Ronnie didn't like to show his ass in front of Steve. Ronnie curtailed his drinking in front of Steve. Ronnie respected Steve. And that meant that there were going to be many more albums. Look at all the duets. You got that right, where Ronnie and Steve sing together. And then how many lead singers of how many bands, including the Rolling Stones, would the lead singer walk off stage and maybe have a smoke and a glass of water or something and towel off while Steve Gaines sang a song in front of 150,000 people in a stadium? That was Ronnie Van Zant. He would let Steve sing Ain't No Good Life in front of a stadium full of people while he took a little break because he deserved a break. Now, it showed me the strength of character of Ronnie Van Zant, the strength of character of Steve Gaines, and the confidence that Ronnie had in not only himself, but Steve Gaines to go out there and front his band that he put together with tender, loving care and also an iron fist. I mean, what does that tell you? We lost all the albums that Ronnie and Steve would have done together, all of the duets that would have come. Ronnie left a huge legacy, but Steve Gaines had yet to really build his legacy. He's got one, and it's a big one. He had yet to show his metal, the metal of his character, because that guy was a songwriter. He had a million of them. That's what I think about every time I play, is the potential of Ronnie and Steve together. And we'll never get that back, but look what we've got.
You bring up a great point, and since the late 70s, I think anyone would agree there's been a lot of musical talent out there, but I don't think there has been a band since that you could say that their songwriting across the board, and what by across the board, I mean when they put out an album and every song on that album has just incredible songwriting, I don't think anyone can say that that's happened since.
Well, you're absolutely right. Ronnie did not write hit songs. He wrote hit albums. And he got help from Gary and Alan and Leon and Billy and then Steve. And he got help from all these guys. And there would have been so much more. But Ronnie wrote hit albums. I'm just glad to be included, man.
I just love the stories when people talk about how he never wrote anything down. He always wrote them in his head and then walked over to the microphone and just started singing. I thought that was just an incredible quality.
He didn't have to write anything down because there was a bevy of people out there ready to write down his words and research them and study them and put them to music and write out all the notes and put out the sheet music. And you're right. I watched him. I was there. I roomed with Ronnie. I lived with Ronnie. I was with Ronnie more than his family was with him in the last years of his life. And he never wrote anything down. It amazed me. And then in the studio, nowadays, if they want to double a vocal, they'll just take a machine and double that vocal. Ronnie would go in and sing right on top of what he just sang, and he would sing it exactly note for freaking note. That's the genius of Ronnie Van Zant, man.
Definitely one of a kind. You touched on something earlier, and I wanted to circle back around to that. And after you medically recovered from the crash, you traveled to Jerusalem and stayed there for a while. What was the motivation behind that?
Well, first thing I did was put together a band called Studebaker Hawk. And we were really good. We were playing all over the place. And then I put APB together from that band and put out a couple of albums on MCA Records, a subsidiary called Carousel Records. Had a 5-record deal. But I saw after the 2 records that the record company, they weren't supporting us whatsoever. They were just using us as a tax write-off. So I pulled the plug. Even though we had all the material for the 3rd album, I pulled the plug. And then I went to Jerusalem, Israel, to a friend of mine I introduced when I was going to Ohio State University. I introduced him to his wife. They ended up having 14 children, and they lived over there. And I wanted to go work on my character and study basically Old Testament, Leviticus, physics, that type of stuff. I just wanted to get my head straight because, after the plane crash and after I wrecked my motorcycle and broke my leg in 21 places, especially after the plane crash, I had a survivor's guilt. Why am I alive and none of my friends? Why is Ronnie not alive and I'm alive? Why am I alive and Steve Gaines is not alive? I was drinking pretty heavily and everything that goes with that, just being a complete dumbass. And I wrecked like 6 cars in a row, BMWs and Mercedes. Those cars, because they were expensive, good cars, they saved my life. If I'd have been driving anything inferior to one of those vehicles, I could have been squashed and crushed and killed. But I was basically trying to kill myself. I heard a saying the other day, if all you're doing is trying to stay alive, that's not living.
So basically, you sort of went there to kind of right your compass.
I did, man. I needed to get my keel straight, and I did. I worked for the Jewish people. I'm a Gentile. I'm Methodist, raised in the Methodist Church. I went over there to work for the Jewish people and help them. I was a bodyguard because of my Marine Corps training to a lot of the rabbis, some of the older, very famous, like I'm talking Albert Einstein famous over there in that world, smart people. And I was a bodyguard, and I carried one Glock 145 and a survivor's knife. I mean, I looked like Rambo. My job was to make sure they were safe. And then the Intifada, do you know that word, Intifada?
I've heard it.
What it means is Arab uprising. So there was an Arab uprising, the first Intifada there in Jerusalem, and there were suicide bombers, and it was time for me to get my children out of that city. So we came back to America, but we lived over there off and on for 3 years. It was an education for my two oldest sons, and one of my daughters was conceived there, Misty Liberty. She was conceived in Jerusalem. And then Chris and Marshall, I live with Marshall, and he's a songwriter. We jam every day, and I'm the drummer in my son Chris's band. We're an amazing band. It's all original stuff. I went over there to just try to become a human being and a better person and work on my character. That pretty much sums it up, man.
Well, that sounds like a very healthy choice. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. Obviously, you came back to the States. A few episodes back, we had Bobby Golden from Stillwater, one of the three guitarists from Stillwater, which is one of my favorite bands as well. And he was telling us the story about the 79 Volunteer Jam, Charlie Daniels event. And Stillwater was the last band on stage before Charlie Daniels came out and surprised the crowd with what I call those four prophetic words. Lynyrd Skynyrd is back. And you guys came out and played, and by all accounts, the crowd went crazy. Being the first time that you guys had played together since the plane crash, and as I recall, Leon was still unable to play because his arm hadn't recovered yet. But how was that? I mean, that had to be a very heavy moment.
It was. It definitely was. Of course, Charlie always packs them in. It felt good and it felt bad. The fact is, and we know this now, Charlie, that was nice of him to say, but without Ronnie Van Zant, there is no Lynyrd Skynyrd. There are Lynyrd Skynyrd tribute bands. That's what I have. I have the music of Ronnie Van Zant. That's what our album is about. We are honoring the music of Ronnie Van Zant and his band. And I feel very lucky to be included as one of his band members. That's what we're about. But without Ronnie Van Zant, no, there is no Lynyrd Skynyrd. But Charlie was just being nice. He was caught up in the moment, right?
Sure.
He said, Lynyrd Skynyrd is back. What he should have said was, ladies and gentlemen, here's Gary Rossington, Alan Collins, Leon Wilkeson, Billy Pyle, and Artimus Pyle. They're going to jam for you tonight. The crowd did go crazy, of course. Freebird was supposed to be never sung again. We always put a Stetson on a microphone, a lone microphone with a spotlight on it on the tribute tour. And Ronnie didn't sing and Johnny didn't sing. Later on, money, let me put it this way. Greed changes everything. And all of a sudden it was okay for the surviving members to do Freebird on stage. I had nothing to do with that. I had left the band. I was the drummer of the real Lynyrd Skynyrd, Jim. I didn't want to be the drummer of something much, much less. And at the time, frankly, it was a cocaine, alcohol-fueled, greedy, backstabbing mess. And we had this entourage that was working for us, and every one of them were taking money under the table. We in the band on that tribute tour, we were just trying to play 100 shows the best we could, getting our chops back. We had rehearsals, but Ed King was part of the band. Ed was out there with us. The whole thing, the first 32 cities was fantastic, and we felt good about it. We ended in Dallas. From that point on, everybody started getting money in their pocket. All of a sudden, they started partying. I smoked my weed. I smoked pot. It's always made me laugh instead of making me cry. So I was satisfied with smoking a little bit of weed. The band fell into a gluttonous, drug and alcohol-fueled ego. It was like we had this big entourage, and everybody was kissing Gary's ass because he's really de facto leader of Lynyrd Skynyrd. He was the Prez. Everybody called him the Prez. And they put a lot of pressure on Gary's shoulders. They actually killed him. He had 7 heart attacks in the last 7 years of his life. He's 71 years old. He could have lived longer. But every time he'd have a heart attack and they'd have to take the band off the road and miss out on that money, that fucking money they lived for, Gary would agree to go back on way before a doctor. Any doctor, Jim, would tell you, take 6 months to a year after you've had a heart procedure and get strong, get therapy and get strong and then go back out and make that money for everybody. But Gary was a trooper, man. They would shame Gary in and it didn't take much. All they'd have to say is, Gary, we need that money. And Gary'd go, okay. And he'd go back out there and then he'd have another heart attack. I don't want to put too fine a point on my point, but man, they worked Gary into an earlier grave than he needed to be. That's just my opinion. I mean, Jim, there are people that weren't even on the airplane that tell their story and say that this is the way it happened. They weren't even on the plane. They weren't in the band. They weren't in the crew. They were just people sitting back in Jacksonville, Florida, becoming the experts on Lynyrd Skynyrd. There are so many of them in Jacksonville. So many, I mean hundreds, if not thousands, of people in Jacksonville that think they know more about the band than the band. And those people actually can kiss my butt.
They will hear it all on this episode, and I appreciate you being very candid with our listeners.
I am, if nothing but candid. There's no filter on me as far as telling the truth. I did the movie. I was sued the entire time I was trying to do this movie about the plane crash. And I asked all of the members of the Lynyrd Skynyrd organization, and that includes everybody, band and wives and office holders. I asked everybody to come to the table with me and let's make a movie together. Instead, they all got together with a bunch of $1,000 an hour blood-sucking weasel attorneys, and they attacked me. They called me every name in the book. They said Artimus Pyle is a poo-poo face, and he's going to make a horrible movie about the band, and he's going to do this, and he's going to do that. Well, it's just like this album that I did. This album that I'm doing right now is going to make money for all of the children and grandchildren of my friends in Lynyrd Skynyrd that are now up in rock and roll heaven. We're going to make money for the children and grandchildren by using the songs. And of course, we pay the proper licensing fees. Of course, we pay the mechanicals. Of course, we give credit where credit's due. That's one big lesson that Ronnie Van Zant taught me. Plagiarism sucks. Ronnie always said, give credit where credit is due. And I would always do that. So the families and the children are going to make money on this album that we're doing. I didn't do it for money. I didn't do the movie for money. I didn't sign one single contract that gives me $1. And I worked on the soundtrack and the movie like a dog. And I got kicked in the face like a dog. But we got it done. We won in the appellate courts. 3 judges unanimously voted and said, hey, y'all, Artimus Pyle is allowed to tell his own story. So there's one song, and you probably know the answer to this. There's one song that we got to use in the movie because I didn't want to use any Skynyrd music because I knew I'd be another bunch of $1,000 an hour bloodsuckers would come after me. I used one song. It's called Call Me the Breeze. Jim, what for no prize? I'll come over and mow your grass and wash your car. Tell us, why could I use Call Me the Breeze?
Skynyrd didn't write it. J.J. Cale wrote it. Is that correct?
You're the man, J.J. Cale. So I just paid, like everybody else does, my licensing fee, and we used it for a live shot in the movie where the band's on stage, and we're playing Call Me the Breeze. We had a $1,800,000 budget to do the movie, which is a very low budget, and the powers that be spent $2.5 million in legal fees because they lost. I didn't want to cost them $2.5 million, and I begged them to come to the table with me, and let's be friends. Let's work together and make a better movie, a bigger movie. But I am very proud of the movie that we made. It was the best we could do under the lawsuits and the amount that we had to spend on it. We did it in Los Angeles. We had to use a different airplane, which I like it. It's a tail dragger, C-117, a Goonie bird. I flew them in the Marine Corps many times. But it has 2 engines and the cockpit area looks really cool. It's got a good sound. It wasn't a 560 Convair like we crashed or the 240. the Pratt & Whitney Convair, not the turboprop 560 that we had. But those planes are expensive to use them in movies. You can't just rent one for $29.95 a day. Those things are expensive. So we had to use a more common aircraft, which was the C-117 tail dragger. But you know what? If anybody doesn't like it, they can kiss my butt.
For our listeners that aren't familiar, the film is Street Survivors. I think it's available on Prime currently.
Let me tell you something, brother. I don't make a dime on that movie. I don't make a dime on the soundtrack. My band, APB, they wrote a beautiful song for the soundtrack called Street Survivor. It's the title track. I'd put it up against any Southern rock song ever written. I'd put it up right now. I'd play it in front of the Rolling Stones right now. It was written by my band, APB, for the movie. And my son, Christopher Chappell Pyle, he wrote 4 songs for the movie soundtrack. My son, Marshall Daniel Pyle, wrote a beautiful song called Southern Feeling. The hook on it is, live each day like it could be the last day of your life. It was very prophetic, and it was played right when we were rolling up to the guys were in the limousines, and I was in my Jeep, and we were rolling up to the airplane for the last flight. We were not going to land that aircraft ever again. We were going to crash it. And Marshall's song, Southern Feeling, was playing in the background, and he actually got about 2.5 minutes of the song, because usually if you've got a song and a soundtrack, you only get just a small window, unless it's the opening or closing song. I'm very proud of the soundtrack and the movie. It's important for people to know I don't make a dime on that movie. I did it because I wanted Lynyrd Skynyrd fans to have an idea of what we went through on that fateful day and that fateful night.
And I think you did a great job. And I think the fans will agree. Those that haven't seen it, when they do, I think they will agree.
Now, Hollywood went a little overboard on the nudity. I told Hollywood and their director and the film company, Cleopatra, I told them all, I said, there was a lot of nudity. People streaking our stages back in the days. It happened at every gig. People would take off all their clothes and then streak across the stage, I guess, just to say they did it. And when we were on these big stadium stages, it was pretty wild. Men and women would get out there and streak. But of course, Hollywood being Hollywood, they put in a little more nudity than was believable. There's one scene where we're in a hotel room, and it's the whole band and all the crew members, and there's like 20 chicks, and like 3 of them are butt naked. I mean, full frontal. And that never happened, man. We weren't like Romans sitting around by the Roman baths with butt naked girls like running around. But yes, there was a lot of breasts that came out. And there was, in the sex that the band members had was in the dark, in a hotel room by themselves. The Hollywood guys, they kind of, a lot of nudity. So I always tell people, I say, don't show this to children. I said, this movie is not for children. It's about the 60s and the 70s, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And it's the way it happened to an extent. But yeah, I'm very proud of the effort. And think about it, Jim. Those young people portraying us in our 20s, I worked with every one of them. They had my number 24/7 on LA time. They would call me and ask me, what would a certain band member do in a certain situation? And so those kids that put their time and souls into those roles, if we would have lost that lawsuit, that movie would never have been seen. All their hard work could have gone for nothing. It did come out. We released it during pandemic, and it's hard to release a soundtrack in a movie when it's not pandemic, right? We got a few awards, People's Choice Awards, and the bottom line is everything in the movie is true. It is accurate to the degree that we could make it, not being able to get the right airplane. So I'm very proud of it. And anybody that didn't like it doesn't really understand what we went through to do it. So I forgive everybody, man. Back from that plane crash, people that have been running their mouths and saying false things, and people that have said bad things about me that weren't true and caused a great deal of pain for my family. People that have lied about me. All I can do at this point in my life, I just turned 75. I forgive everybody. You never know the circumstances that makes people the way they are. People that have to make up stories to make themselves look big. Maybe they had a bad childhood. I don't know. I had a great childhood. I rode horses, ran bulldozers, and laid out in fields and watched the clouds fly over.
Check back next week for the conclusion of our interview with Artimus Pyle. In 1989, Neil Young released his album Freedom, which contained the song Rockin' in the Free World. That song went on to be covered by a lot of different artists, and there's some great versions out there, but we're going to tell you about one that I'm guessing you would never accidentally stumble across. The Scottish band Simple Minds made their mark in the United States with a song that went all the way to number 1, Don't You Forget About Me, and it was on the soundtrack of the film The Breakfast Club. My guess is if you listen to that song, you wouldn't think of this band as rockers, but if you check out their cover of Rockin' in the Free World on their 2009 album Graffiti Soul, you might rethink that. Check it out and let us know what you think. For this week's Hidden Gem, we want to suggest the 2016 EP Highwayman from blues rocker Jared James Nichols. It contains 5 songs, but 2 of them are blistering covers. We're an American band and 30 Days in the Hole. Jared James Nichols, Highwayman from 2016. Give it a listen. We'll be back next week with the conclusion of our 3-part series with Artimus Pyle and some more good stuff that I think you rockers are going to enjoy. We'll see you then.
Thanks for listening.